السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله على إحسانه وشكر له على تفضله وامتنانه، ولا إله إلا الله تعظيما لشأنه، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله داعي إلى رضوانه وعلى آله وأصحابه وإخوانه. أما بعد، يقول الشاعر أبو النواس: يا رب عظمت ذنوبي كثرة، فلقد علمت بأن عفوك أعظم، إن كان لا يرجوك إلا محسن، فبمن يلوذ ويستجير المجرم، أدعوك ربي كما أمرت تضرعا، فإذا رددت يدي فمن ذا يرحم، ما لي إليك الوسيلة إلا الرجاء، وجميل عفوك ثم أني مسلم. إخواني في الله, we are still discussing about the third category of people on the day of judgment, and these are the righteous Muslims, the pious Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran: ثُمَّ أَوْرَثْنَا الْكِتَابَ الَّذِينَ اصْطَفَيْنَا مِنْ عِبَادِنَا فَمِنْهُمْ ظَالِمٌ لِنَفْسِهِ وَمِنْهُمْ مُقْتَصِدٌ وَمِنْهُمْ سَابِقٌ بِالْخَيْرَاتِ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about the third category of pious Muslims, how they will be on the day of judgment. Tonight, ikhwani fillah, we shall talk about a group that shall be protected on the day of judgment. On that day, ikhwani fillah, we mentioned the mountains are not exempt. Mountains shall be destroyed, turned into dust, blown away like cotton. The mountains have not done any mistake, yet they are not exempt from the terror of that day. The sky will be cracked, broken up into pieces, not exempt. It has not done any sin in the sky. The sun, إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ, will be turned into a sphere, no light, and it will be brought down the distance of a mile. Hadith of Prophet ﷺ, he says that the sun will just be above us on the day of judgment, all of us, and the heat will be so intense, ikhwani fillah, that some of us will sweat so much, the sweat will reach the ka'bayn, will reach the ankles. Others it will reach the rukbatain, it will reach the knees. Others it will reach the earlobes. And some of us on the day of judgment shall drown in our own sweat because of the heat and the intense heat that's coming from the sun on that day. But don't fear, ikhwani fillah. There's a group, as mentioned by Prophet ﷺ, on that day they shall be given a shade. On the day there's no shade except the shade of Ar-Rahman. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrates that the Prophet ﷺ, he says, سَبْعَةٌ يُذِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي ظِلِّهِ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ. From amongst the people that I'm going to talk to you about in this hadith, the Prophet ﷺ is saying, 7 of them I'm going to mention to you are going to be given a shade on the day there's no shade except the shade of Allah. So many people are going to be given a shade on the day of judgment. But from amongst the people he mentions in this hadith, there are 7 categories he's going to tell us. So he says, سَبْعَةٌ يُذِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي ظِلِّهِ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ. He says, number 1, Al-Imam Al-Adil, the Imam, the leader, the just ruler. Number 2, he says, شَابٌ نَشَأَ فِي عِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ. He says, the young boys, the young men who grew up in the worship, the obedience of Allah Azza wa Jal. That's category number 2. Number 3, he says, وَرَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ بِالْمَسَاجِدِ. A man whose heart is attached to the mosque. Every time he wants to be at the mosque, every time his heart is attached to the house of Allah Azza wa Jal. Number 4, he says, وَرَجُلَانِ تَحَابَّ فِي اللَّهِ اجْتَمَعَ عَلَيْهِ وَتَفَرَّقَ عَلَيْهِ. Says 2 people, 2 brothers, they love each other for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. When they gather, they're with that love. When they depart, they're not together. They still have that love for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Number 5, he says, وَرَجُلٌ دَعَتْهُ امْرَأَةٌ ذَاتُ مَنْسِبٍ وَجَمَالٍ فَقَالَ إِنِّي أَخَافُ اللَّهِ. And this is a young man who is called by a beautiful lady, who has status, who has position. Come sleep with me, come fornicate, come do zina with me. And he says, إِنِّي أَخَافُ اللَّهِ, I fear Allah Azza wa Jal. And number 6, وَرَجُلٌ تصدق فأنفق حتى لا تعلم شماله ما تنفق يمينه. A man who gives out so much sadaqah and he hides his sadaqah that his left hand does not know what his right hand has given. And number 7, he says, وَرَجُلٌ ذَكَرَ اللَّهَ خَالِيًا فَفَاضَتْ عَيْنَاهُ. Is a man who remembers Allah when he is private. At night he wakes up or in the mosque in a corner, he hides himself and he remembers Allah Azza wa Jal. فَفَاضَتْ عَيْنَاهُ, and he starts crying for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. This hadith has been narrated by Imam Bukhari and Imam Muslim. Let us begin the hadith. The first part, he says, alayhi salatu salam, says, سَبْعَةٌ يُذِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ. He says 7 people shall be given a shade on the day there is no shade other than the shade of Allah. When you hear a number in a hadith, ikhwani fillah, it has no meaning. Al-adad la mafhuma lahu. They say, the scholars, a number does not have any meaning. He says in a different hadith that 3 attributes of nifaq. It does not mean there are only 3 attributes. There can be more. When this hadith says 7 are going to be given a shade, it does not mean it's strictly 7. It's just mentioning 7 of the people who will be given a shade. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, rahimahullah, one of the scholars, he passed away in the year 852 of the Hijri calendar. He gathered all the hadiths mentioning the people who will be given a shade on the Day of Judgment in his book called Ma'rifatul Khisal al-Musila lil-Dhalal. And he mentioned many categories. So 7 people that are mentioned in this hadith are going to be given a shade on the Day of Judgment. What is the type of shade that they're going to be given? In a different hadith, he says, Dhillul Arsh, that this shade is from the Arshur Rahman. Why do you need a shade on the Day of Judgment? Why do you need a shade? Because of the heat, and people will be sweating and falling in the sweat. So the first category will be given a shade, ikhwani fillah, Al-Imam Al-Adil. The Imam who's just. The Imam is the overruler, the king, the minister, the governor. You in your own house, you're a king. You as a manager in your business, you're a leader. Whoever has been given a position of leadership, let them be just. For the Day of Judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them a shade. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands you to be just. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُكُمْ أَن تُؤَدُّوا الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَى أَهْلِهَا وَإِذَا حَكَمْتُمْ بَيْنَ النَّاسِ أَن تَحْكُمُوا بِالْعَدْلِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands you to give everyone what you have been entrusted with. You've been given an amana. You have to fulfill that amana. Then he mentions from the types of amana, أن تحكموا بالعدل. When you rule amongst the people, judge in fairness. You have one of the greatest prophets of Allah Azza wa Jalla, the Prophet Dawood alayhi salam. One day he's in his chambers, he's preparing to do his ibadah. Then 2 men enter his chambers, his own bedroom. Then one of them says, إن هذا أخي له 99 نعجة ولي نعجة واحدة فقال أكفلنيها وعزني في الخطاب. He says, one of them, that this is my brother. We are brothers. But this brother of mine, he has 99 goats. And I have only 1 goat. And he defeated me in discussion and he took from me that 1 goat. Oh Dawood, rule upon us. Dawood alayhi salam, he rules. And he judges amongst the 2 of them. And then he says, وَإِنَّ كَثِيرًا مِنَ الْخُلَطَاءِ لَا يَبْغِي بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. He says, many of the people who are in business, who are in partnerships, they always wrong each other. But Dawood alayhi salam is a prophet, but he made a mistake. What is the mistake that Dawood did? He did not listen to both parties. And that is one of the requirements of justice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, once Dawood remembered his mistake, he says, Ya Dawood, inna ja'alnaka khalifatan fil ard, fahkum bayna an-nasi bil-adl. Bil-haq. Oh Dawood, we made you a ruler upon the earth. When you judge amongst the people, judge in a truthful manner. So, khani fillah, from amongst the things that are required from us as Muslims is to judge in justice. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ahkamul hakimin. He's the king of all judges. But he says, Ya ibadi, inni harramtu dhulma ala nafsi, wa ja'altuhu baynakum muharraman fala tadhalamu. O my servants, I have made haram on myself to oppress anyone. So all people do not oppress each other. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is able to oppress if he wishes, but he has made it forbidden to himself that he will not oppress anyone. And we have to take from Allah Azza wa Jal that we do not oppress anyone at all. That is what is required from us. You have, ikhwani fillah, some people, when they rule amongst the people, they look at their religion. They look at their tribe. They look at a person's social status. All this does not matter. It's not required in our religion in the least bit. A woman one day, she stole at the time of Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. Then the people the nobles, they said, she has stolen and she comes from a well-known family. It is not proper for her to have her hand cut off. Then they sent, who are we going to send to intercede, to ask the Prophet ﷺ not to cut off the hand of this lady? So they say, سَنُرْسِلُ حِبَّ إِبْنِ حِبِّ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم. We shall send the one who is loved, the son of the one who is loved, Usama bin Zayd radiallahu anhu. They send him to the Prophet ﷺ to ask him, "Oh Prophet, do not cut the hand of this lady. She comes from a well-known family." The Prophet ﷺ was very angry. He says, "Atashfa'u fi haddin min hududillah?" Are you going to intercede from one of the rights of Allah Azza wa Jalla when it comes to punishment? Wallahi, law anna Fatima binti Muhammad saraqat laqata'tu yadaha. If Fatima, my own daughter Fatima, stole, wallahi I will cut off her hand. That is the justice that we Muslims stand up with. You do not have the king's sons been absolved of mistakes, then you punish the poor people, the lower people in society. Everyone, when it comes to the law, they are punished, they are equal. No one is absolved. So the first person will be granted that status, ikhwani fillah, on the day of judgment. يَوْمَ لَا ذِلَّ إِلَّا ذِلُّ الْإِمَامُ الْعَادِلُ. The imam who is just. Number two, he says, the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, وَشَابٌ نَشَأَ فِي عِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ, is the young man who was brought up by the to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. This young man, from the time they were children, they did not know what ma'asiyah was. They knew the mosque, they knew ta'ah, they knew Allah Azza wa Jal. They were not overtaken by shahawat, by the iblis and shaitan and his whispers. They followed one path from the time of the young age until they left this dunya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّهُمْ فِتْيَةٌ آمَنُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ وَزِدْنَاهُمْ هُدًى. It says that these are young men who believed in Allah Azza wa Jal, and we increased upon them guidance. Let's just understand this verse for a minute, ikhwani fillah. You know the Masih ad-Dajjal is going to come. And that is the greatest trial from the time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created Adam alayhi salam until the day of judgment. But it tells us, all Muslims, you want protection from the Masih ad-Dajjal, memorize the first 10 verses of Surah Al-Kahf. And Surah Al-Kahf, the first verses, talks about who? About these young men. Yes, memorize it, but also understand the meaning. These young men, they ran away when their religion became an issue. They ran away for the sake of their iman, their faith, their aqidah, their tawheed. They left the people and went to a cave and stayed there for 3 centuries plus. So when the Masih ad-Dajjal comes to this world, don't be, I know I have iman, I pray every day in the mosque. Run away to Mecca, run away to Medina, run away to the mountains. Be like these young men who have been given an example for. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَاتَّبَعَتْهُمْ ذُرِّيَّتُهُمْ بِإِيمَانٍ أَلْحَقْنَا بِهِمْ ذُرِّيَّتَهُمْ وَمَا أَلَّتْنَاهُمْ مِنْ عَمَلِهِمْ مِنْ شَيْءٍ. Whoever is believing and their children follow them in that path, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make sure that you parents are gathered with those righteous children on the day of judgment. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he says, إِذَا مَاتَ الْإِنسَانُ انْقَطَعَ عَنْهُ عَمَلُهُ إِلَّا مِنْ إِحْدَى ثَلَاثٍ. When a person passes away, all his deeds end. Except what, ikhwani fillah? وَلَدٌ صَالِحٌ يَدْعُو لَهُ. A young man, a young child who makes dua for his parent. A parent enters Jannah, ikhwani fillah. Then he starts going up. He wonders, why am I overtaking? He's overtaking some people in Jannah. He's rising up in Jannah. And he's wondering, why am I overtaking these people? And I thought they were much better than me. I'm going higher and much higher in Jannah. He's told, بِإِسْتِغْفَارِ وَلَدِكَ لَكْ بَعْدَكَ. Because of the istighfar, your son or your daughter was making for you dua afterwards. So, ikhwani fillah, we have to have many of these children in our society. So the Prophet ﷺ says, وَشَابٌ نَشَأَ فِي عِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ. The young boy who lives in the worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. Ikhwani fillah, if you look at our history, the Prophet ﷺ is going for hijrah. He wants to leave Mecca. He goes to which city? Medina. So he says to one of the young men, this Quraysh want to kill me. Go stay in my bed so they think you are sleeping on it. Then I can go and escape and go to Medina with Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. He left a young boy, the very first young boy to become Muslim, Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. And he goes, alayhi salam, to Medina. You have another young boy, ikhwani fillah, his cousin, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib. He comes here to Ethiopia for hijrah. He goes back to Medina in the year 7 of Hijrah, in the year of Khaybar. The Prophet ﷺ is very happy to see Ja'far after all these years. Then after a short while he tells, "Oh Ja'far, we have the Romans attacking the Muslims. We have to form an army." So they form a small army, 3,000 Muslims. They said, the leader of the army is Zayd. If Zayd is killed, Ja'far, you young boy, you're going to be the leader. If Ja'far you're killed, Abdullah ibn Rawaha. So they go, the army of the Muslims. Zayd is killed. Zayd bin Haritha radiallahu anhu is killed. The beloved of the Prophet ﷺ. The leadership comes to Ja'far. Ja'far, he says, "Ya habbadha al-jannah wa iqtirabuha. يا حبذا الجنة واقترابها طيبة وبارد شرابها والروم قد دنا عذابها علي إن لقيتها ضرابها." He speaks these lines of poetry radiallahu anhu, and he dies as a shaheed, cut off both hands, and he's given wings in Jannah. These other young boys, إنهم فتية آمنوا بربهم وزدناهم هدى. The Prophet ﷺ is about to die. He says, "O Muslims, I am sending an army led by Usama bin Zayd, who is only 17 years of age. The son of Zayd, who we just mentioned was killed in the Battle of Mu'tah. 17 years of age. And in this army, Abu Bakr, you're inside the army, Umar, you're inside the army, the greats of Islam, the Muhajirun, the Imams of this Ummah, and they are led by this young man, Usama bin Zayd. The Prophet dies, alayhi salam. The people, they revolt, they leave Islam in droves. These Muslims tell Abu Bakr, "Oh Abu Bakr, it is not wise for you to make this army leave Medina, yet we are in a state of weakness. It will stay." No. He says, "No. I will not change even one single command of the Prophet ﷺ. This army of Usama has to leave Medina." So he tells Usama, "I beg you, Usama, leave with me Umar ibn Khattab so that I can stay." He's the Khalifa is asking this young boy. Look how Islam raised the status of this young boy, Usama bin Zayd. You have in the year 92 of the Hijri calendar, a young boy from North Africa. He is sent to cross the Mediterranean, and he conquers Spain, Andalus, Tariq ibn Ziyad, only in his 40s, the year 92 of the Hijri calendar. In the same time, in the east, yes, you have another man, Muhammad ibn al-Qasim, al-Thaqafi, 17 years or 18 years of age. He was born in the year 72 of the Hijri calendar. In the year 90 of the Hijri calendar, he conquers India. Islam reached India because of this man. You find Muslims, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, you count these 3 countries, ikhwani fillah, that is the greatest population of Muslims in the entire world, even more than Indonesia. India plus Pakistan plus Bangladesh is the greatest population of Muslims in the entire world, this sub-Asian continent. And it's one young boy who made Islam reach these lands, Muhammad ibn al-Qasim al-Thaqafi radiallahu anhu. Imam Malik, before Imam Malik, Sufyan al-Thawri rahimahullah is only 18 years of age, and the scholars consider him a scholar. Abu Ishaq al-Sabi'i, he says, when he sees Sufyan al-Thawri, he says, وَآتَيْنَاهُ الْحُكْمَ الصَّبِيَّةِ. He says, this young man has been given knowledge like Yahya alayhi salam when he was very young. Imam Malik is only 17 years of age. 70 scholars of Medina, they say to him, "You are fit to give fatwa." Imam Malik bin Anas died in the year 179 of the Hijri calendar. You have so many scholars that had people. Ibn Hajar Ibn Taymiyyah al-Harrani, he's only like 9 years. He goes to a Jewish man, he debates with him, and he makes him a Muslim. 9 years of age. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani was reading Taraweeh in Mecca when he was 10 or 11. This is how we brought our societies. شَابٌ نَشَأَ فِي عِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ. This is the second category of people who are going to be given a shade on the Day of Judgment. These young boys who have grown up in the worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. The third category, ikhwani fillah, وَرَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. Young boy or young man, his heart is attached to the mosque. He loves nothing else except the mosque. The Prophet ﷺ says, أَحَبُّ الْبِقَاعِ إِلَى اللَّهِ مَسَاجِدُهَا. The most beloved area in the world is the mosque of Allah Azza wa Jal. This is the house of Allah Azza wa Jal. في بيوت أذن الله أن ترفع ويذكر فيها اسمه يسبح له فيها بالغدو والآصال رجال. This is a place where the Muslims, they find serenity, they find peace. This is where the iman increases. This is the house of Allah. Man bana lillahi baytan fi dunya, bana Allahu lahu baytan fil jannah. Whoever builds a house in this world for Allah, Allah will build for them a house in Jannah. They find the love of Allah Azza wa Jal in the mosque. They find that they are in the house of Allah Azza wa Jal. And who does not feel happy to be in the presence of Allah Azza wa Jal, to be in His house? So you find that this man, his heart is not attached to shahwat, to the serials or the movies or the Netflixes. His heart is attached to the mosque. Every time he's asking, yes, I'm at work. When is the next salah? Asr is at 4 o'clock. 3:30, he starts preparing for his wudu. You find him here at the mosque at 3:40. Maghrib at 6:20. You find him 5:40, he starts preparing for his wudu. 5:50, he's here at the mosque. Between Maghrib and Isha, no, this is my time. I'm going to spend i'tikaf in the mosque. Maghrib to Isha, I'm not leaving the mosque. Fajr, who comes to the mosque first? People in this mosque, they come at 4:30. I'll make sure tomorrow I come at 4:20. I want my heart, I want to be the first one in this house. So, رَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ فِي الْمَسَاجِدِ. Their hearts are attached to the house of Allah Azza wa Jal. And whoever prays in the house of Allah Azza wa Jal is given 27 times what he gets when he prays alone in his house. 27 times ajr, ikhwani fillah. Number 4, and we finish with this, ikhwani fillah. Tomorrow we'll conclude the rest. He says, alayhi salatu salam, وَرَجُلَانِ تَحَابَّ فِي اللَّهِ اجْتَمَعَ عَلَيْهِ وَتَفَرَّقَ عَلَيْهِ. It's two people who love each other for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. They gather when they love with this love. And when they separate, they're not together. That love is still there. It is a love that is sincere. It is not the love of some people when they're together with you, mashallah. But when they leave you, they're not the same as they are to you. This is sincere love for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he says, أَلَا أَدُلُّكُمْ عَلَى شَيْءٍ إِذَا فَعَلْتُمُوهُ تَحَابَبْتُمْ. Will I not guide you to something? If you do it, you will love each other more. أَفْشُوا السَّلَامَ بَيْنَكُمْ أَفْشُوا السَّلَامَ فِيمَا بَيْنَكُمْ. Say everyone you see, every Muslim you see, you say Assalamu alaikum wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he says in a hadith Qudsi, he says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَيْنَ الْمُتَحَابُّونَ فِي جَلَالِهِ الْيَوْمَ أُذِلُّهُمْ فِي الظِّلِّ يَوْمَ لَا ذِلَّ إِلَّا ذِلِّ. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a hadith Qudsi, he says, where are the ones who loved each other for my sake? On this day, I shall give them a shade from my own shade. In a different hadith, he says, فِي ظِلِّ عَرْشِ. I shall give them a shade from my throne on this day. So, ikhwani fillah, we have to love each other for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he says that if you want the sweetness of Iman, if you want Iman to be beloved to you, from amongst the things he says, and you love for the sake of Allah and you hate for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. That is the Iman, ikhwani fillah. For benefit, ikhwani fillah, on the day of judgment, the disbelievers, they had friends in this world. But those friends do not benefit them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الْأَخِلَّهُ يَوْمَئِذٍ بَعْضُهُمْ لِبَعْضٍ عَدُوٌّ إِلَّا الْمُتَّقِينَ. He says, the friends, these close friends that you have in this world, on the day of judgment, they become your enemies. إِلَّا الْمُتَّقِينَ. Except the people who are pious, who are sincere, who love each other for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Not for the sake of property, not for the sake of tribe, not for the sake of nationalism. They say love each other for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ فَأَصْلِحُوا. That the Muslims, they are brothers. So he gives us some attributes that are required of brothers, ikhwani fillah. There's something, I remember when I used to be in school, it used to be called the bro code. The code between brothers. There's a code that's not written that's between brothers. This is something that comes from the secular world. But also as Muslims, we have a bro code that's mentioned in Surah Al-Hujurat. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا الْمُؤْمِنُونَ إِخْوَةٌ فَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ. Number one, you know your brothers. There's nothing different between you. Your blood is the same as the blood of all these brothers. Yes, you're not the same father and mother, but you have the Rabtul Iman. You have a stronger brotherhood, that which is of Iman. The Prophet ﷺ, he comes to Medina and he says, "Oh Muhajirun, you have left all your wealth in Mecca, you have nothing. Go, each Muhajir gets a family from Ansar." One of the Ansar says to Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he says to him, "Oh brother, I have 2 wives, I have 2 gardens. I'm going to divorce one of my wives. After idda, you marry her. You can give her to your wife." Then he says, "I have 2 farms. One farm I give you and the other farm you take." He says, "Barakallahu fi malik wa ahlik." May Allah bless you with your wealth and your family. And he goes and he gets wealth immediately. That's how the brotherhood. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لا يسخر قوم من قوم عسى أن يكونوا خيرا منهم. Do not mock each other as brothers. That affects your brotherhood. You're not true sincerely for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal if you're mocking each other, if you're making some bad jokes, when you're teasing each other, those jokes are not very good, some of them. The brother might laugh here, but he cries later on. That is not the sincere love for Allah Azza wa Jal. He says, وَلَا يَلْمِزُ بَعْضُ وَلَا تَنَابَزُوا بِالْأَلْقَابِ بِئْسَ الْإِسْمُ الْفُسُوقُ بَعْدَ الْإِيمَانِ. Do not give each other bad names. Say, whatever nicknames people give each other, don't. Then he continues, he says, اجتنبوا كثيرا من الظن إن بعد الظن إثم. Do not think every time or any time negatively about your brother. He says, this person has done this. You have not seen it. You are not witness to that. Always think positively for your brother. You say, no, there's no possible way my brother can do this. Then he says, Allah alayhi salam, وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا. Do not backbite each other. And this is the worst sin, ikhwani fillah, that we have seen clearly. This is the worst sin. أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَن يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيْتًا. Do you want to eat the meat of your own brother? This destroys brotherhood. There's no love, ikhwani fillah. If I am your brother, when I sit with you, you talk well about me. Then when you go outside, you start talking things about me in my back that you can't say to me. If you're indeed my true brother, you'll have told me to my face. Yes, I have a mistake as a human being. But for you as my brother is to complete me, to improve me. My relation with Allah Azza wa Jal, my relation to the people. But you as my so-called brother, you go backbite me. You go slander me. Aina ukhuwa? Where is the brotherhood there? Aina mahabba? And you say you love me for the sake of Allah. When you want to love someone for the sake of Allah, you say uhibbuka fillah. I love you for the sake of Allah. What does that mean? And you reply as a Muslim, ahabbaka Allahu alladhi ahbabtani fi. May Allah love you for the sake you have loved me. One person came to Mu'adh ibn Jabal in Yemen, radiallahu anhu, in Syria. It's Abu Muslim al-Khulani. He loves Mu'adh ibn Jabal. He says, Ya Mu'adh, inni uhibbuk. Oh Mu'adh, I love you for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. He says, Mu'adh, do you love me indeed for the sake of Allah? He says, yes. He says, do you love me for the sake of Allah? Says, no. He says, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, حَقَّتْ مَحَبَّتِ عَلَىٰ, that my love is confirmed for the ones who love for my sake. So, ikhwani fillah, this is the fourth attribute of the people who shall be given a shade on the day of judgment. The day there is no shade other than the shade of Allah Azza wa Jal. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.